Hello everybody, it's a scorching Tuesday here in Greenwich on WGCH. This is Trevor Crow at Trevor and Friends, and sitting next to me I'm delighted to have Steve Meskers, who happens to be the CT rep for 150. He represents Cobb and Old Greenwich. He was elected in 2018 and he's been doing a great job for us. So hey Steve, welcome on the show.
Hey, thank you very much, Trevor. It's great to be here. I really enjoyed the invitation. Looking forward to the conversation.
Well, okay, just a quick, we got to start with what happened in Texas in a moment for the victims of the flooding. I know we all feel the same, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming what happened, and we are hoping that we can do a better job. And even here for thinking about flood warnings, etc. I'm sure you've been on top of that because, again, we have these problems right here in Greenwich. But for those victims, we just a moment of just love and sending thoughts and prayers.
Thank you, Trevor. I think highly necessary to make notice of the passing in such a tragedy. Regardless of the politics of global warming, whether you believe or not, the fact is a couple of degrees temperature is putting humidity into the air. And we're seeing that in Greenwich. We're seeing that in the state of Connecticut, and we just saw it in Texas. That kind of humidity, that kind of volume just wreaks havoc with our infrastructure. We're just not set up as you would be probably in Mississippi and certainly in Florida for tropical storms. And this tropical rain and the density and the amount of volume of rain and water flowing through the system just can't handle it. So yeah, we're gonna have to work on adjusting our policies both in the state of Connecticut and across the country for these types of to avoid these types of tragedies.
Absolutely horrendous. So I know you've been working hard at the state legislature. I want to kind of go over a few of the things that you've been working hard on. One of the things that you sent to me was, and you're gonna have to explain this a little better for me, but I love the idea that we're teaching trades, and I believe our trade schools are for free. We have a generation, especially of young men, who need to be trained to be doing jobs that will not be replaced by AI, by the way. You're gonna need an HVAC guy, an electrician, a plumber, no matter what happens out there. So I want to see us do a better job of getting these young people, and I shouldn't be gendered about this, whatever gender they are, get them good jobs, educated, and out there working and learning. So you've been working on a piece of legislation that's important to this process. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I'm glad you walked that back a little bit. Even though I'm older than you on the gender issue, it's important that we recognize that the trades, for the most part, represent a tremendous opportunity. So last year, we held hearings in the Commerce Department to review the process of licensing and review the restrictions that exist or currently or did exist on legislation. So I personally worked on that with hearings, and I drafted legislation. Ultimately, it's not exclusively the purview of Commerce, so the actual bill came out through general law. But the bill that came out was, I think, a material change. Up until, I think dating back 30 years or so, there was a restriction on the amount of hiring that a private company could do of journeymen versus apprentices. So up until this past year, if you were a small mom and pop shop and you had 3 journeymen, which are fully licensed, plumbers, HVAC, basically it worked out to about 5 or 6 of the trades. If you were fully licensed and you had 3 employees that were what they call journeymen, you were capped at the number of apprentices you could hire. So that if you wanted to hire another apprentice and go to 4 apprentices, you had to hire an additional 3 journeymen. So essentially, if you wanted to get to 4 apprentices, you had to have 6 journeymen. If you wanted to go for another apprentice, you'd have to hire another 3. So it was a ratio of 3 to 1. It was both, I thought, a restraint of trade, and more importantly, that the state of Connecticut is investing a huge amount of money in trade schools. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to do is provide a tremendous career opportunity. When you look at the issues of tariffs, you look at the issues of economic development, we talk about non-tradable goods and services and tradable goods and services. And we used to when I was in banking and in economics. So basically, up until now, your washing machine could be manufactured anywhere at the lowest price. But guess what? The repairman has to be local.
There you go.
So you will see that today you'll spend $1,000 or $900 for a refrigerator because it's manufactured in far off places at very low labor costs. But to get it repaired could cost as much as $250 or $350 for a visit.
Oh yeah.
So this provides a gateway opportunity for people to create an upper middle class life. Those jobs will start at 50 or 60, and when you're fully accredited as a journeyman, you could be at $100,000 to $115,000 a year. These are the gateway and pathways to the middle class. So I thought it was essential that we break down the limitation. You know, and in terms of safety, there never was we weren't creating any safety risks. On-site work requires a journeyman with every apprentice.
So one-to-one.
There was always one-to-one. So this was just the ability to hire and expand and grow your business. So I think it was landmark legislation. I was happy to help. Many of the smaller firms reached out to me, and they were very grateful. So, this will start getting implemented this year.
Yeah, I really like this, Steve. I'm really, really happy to hear this is happening. Many of our young people have gone to four-year colleges. They're coming out, they're having a very tough time getting hired. We're not realizing that these trades, these electricians, HVAC plumbers, they are coming out of schools if they can get trained, and for these young, changing this legislation would certainly help more young people. We need, like you're saying, we need a pathway forward to the middle and upper classes, upper class. And this is a way to do it. And again, this is something that many of us don't think of. And we've got kids who just went four-year colleges, end up with debt, and can't find jobs, really, and they're still living at home. So this is another way to look at an education here.
Absolutely. And that was what I thought was so important. It was to provide a gateway for our children. And importantly, the restriction we had before, if you think about a child who goes through the trade schools and then goes out and can't get his apprentice job, he's going to try for 6 months or a year, and at some point he's going to think that he's been sold a bill of goods, and he's going to be back at whether it's at Kohl's and in service area or Starbucks, etc. And you'll derail what is the opportunity space in those early years post graduation from a trade apprentice job or apprentice program. You'll derail them, and I think you destroy a lot of opportunity and faith in the system. So I was thrilled to get this done.
I think it's great. So congratulations on that. And again, just sort of everybody out there thinking about, do you really want your child to go to a four-year college, end up with several $100,000 of debt, and hard to find a job? And especially in AI, those entry-level positions are just getting wiped out overnight. So this is maybe a bit of a pivot for some of us to think, well, a trade school might be really good. And Electric Boat has got like 10,000 jobs open, and that's for machining and all these other jobs that pay very well, have great benefits, and have upside. So just think about that, everybody. Okay, moving on, because there's so much to discuss. Thinking about housing and this bill that just got vetoed by Governor Lamont, what are your thoughts on that? What's the future? What do you see happening? How would you change that bill?
So first off, housing is always an issue of local control versus state control. I think the issue on the shortage of housing, which you're seeing across the United States, is twofold. And you're seeing some movements even out of a very progressive governor like Gavin Newsom. The issues become the regulatory framework, the cost of construction, the effectiveness of your construction criteria, the safety features. I was talking to someone about building, and standard home building, if you think about what we do nowadays, we have tremendous amount of LED lighting. And yet, when we use the standard construction framing for housing, we're required everything to handle 10 or 20 or 30 volts. So you have electrical systems that are geared to handle incandescent lighting, higher powers, and therefore you're spending a lot of money on components that may never be used.
Interesting.
You can easily do, I think one of the steps in trying to improve the environment for construction is to lower the cost of construction. And that requires a deep overhaul and review of the construction industry. Akin to, when we get to it, the topic on the Transfer Act, and I'll give you a background on the work on that. I think that's one issue. I think the second issue is that one of the problems I found with the bill was that it did not allow for payment in lieu of parking. So if you think about commercial and residential development, and less so in Greenwich, because Greenwich is a diversion to going vertical. But if you think about Stamford, if you think about Norwalk, and if they want to form joint ventures, commercial and residential, it's more than likely you could create an option for a payment of lieu of parking, that you could get all the entities involved in that commercial space.
Can you explain what payment in lieu of parking means?
Yes, basically that you would be making a payment to the municipality instead of building your own parking.
Got it.
So what you would do is you create funding for shared parking. So if you think about urban environments, and Greenwich, it's a town, not a city, and I'm not pushing it for Greenwich, but I'm saying there were issues that in the bill that prohibited the use of payment in lieu of parking. So you could not resolve that. There were also limitations on parking below, I think, 24 units. And in places like, Bridgeport and Norwalk, there are many places where the density is such that without resolving the parking issue, you're basically imposing on the existing residents and the tenants who are renting the difficulty of dealing with parking. I've heard from many developers, I've heard from many environmentalists that we can live in a zip car environment or Uber car environment. But we've ripped out the infrastructure over the last 100 years for the urban transit system, whether it was trolleys or trains.
Yes.
It's going to take us 40 or 50 or more years and a focus to move away from a car-centric environment.
Yes, we need to do it.
But if you look at the job market and the fragmented nature of the job market with AI, the likelihood that people are going to be living close to their employment or on the railroad grid for that employment is pretty limited.
Yeah.
So I think we're still stuck in a car environment. It's going to take us a long time to get away from it. So I think you have to acknowledge that when you look at development to make sure that there's ample and available parking.
I remember those trolleys. I grew up in Boston, and we had them crisscrossing all around, and it's too bad we don't have them anymore. Right?
Well, in Connecticut, I was at the Trolley Museum where you meet the most fascinating people. And they told me you could basically go from New York to Boston, and you'd have to pay in transfer, but you basically go up the entire shoreline on trolleys.
On trolleys. I think we need to reinstate those days, and again, we have to just get people out of their cars. We have to think more like Europeans. Europeans, it's so expensive to buy gas. Very few people in Europe actually own their cars, but they have public transportation that's really good, or they have amazing bike lanes, like in the Netherlands, etc., where everybody's biking around. Sort of moving on, one last moment. I noticed that Electric Boat bought Macy's in kind of this idea that you're talking about, how do we take these old businesses that were, whether commercial space, whether it's retail, turn them into living spaces or residential, right? So this is a good step forward. Is that what you're looking for as well?
Well, I've often thought that I would love to see, if you look at the time from our efforts in the Second World War and the industrialization and the war effort, I often thought that it would make sense for some of our major defense industries to play a hand in housing. I mean, if you think about, you secure housing, and it's either housing with a rent to own, or the first stage housing as part of their recruiting process. That if they can provide people with entry-level housing for the first 2 or 3 years of employment, 1, they anchor the employees, 2, we help anchor the companies, and 3, we provide that path to the middle class that somebody like Electric Boat obviously does. So I think it's a great idea. I'm hoping that we as a state, can play a part in whether assisting on that financing, because the security of the country depends on the defense industry. The economic strength of the state is anchored in 2 things or 3 things. Principally, it's in the insurance industry, but more importantly, the defense industry. And in tourism. Those are a couple of different pinnacles of our economic growth. So anything that helps anchor our defense industry in my state makes me very happy.
I love it. Okay, building, and that is a bit of a pun on that, is the remediation/transfer bill. So I was just reading about this morning. It's fascinating. I didn't really know the sort of parameters of it, but help us out because you were a very big proponent of this as well this time around.
Right. So, you know, government and sometimes is the best answer and sometimes it's the worst answer.
Yes.
So, with all good intentions, we had legislated. I think I want to go back at least 20 years. What was called the Transfer Act. The Transfer Act was dealing with essentially polluted properties. So if you look at a state like Connecticut or a state like Massachusetts and upstate New York, what you have is a manufacturing history with metals, with refining, with all sorts of things leaving toxicity in the ground. Connecticut, we were finding many companies entering into the process, and it seemed like they entered the process for release-based clarity and couldn't exit. What does that mean?
Years.
Years, exactly. Which means that the Transfer Act became a non-transfer act. And how does that affect all of us? Our cities, our ex-mills and mining areas, the contaminated sites don't get remediated. They don't get remediated, the properties end up on the tax rolls or off the tax rolls and unproductive, and jobs aren't created. So over the last 5 years, so I wasn't at the start of it, I have to commend and hats off to Senator Joan Hartley out of Waterbury. Senator Hartley, who is the co-chair with me on Commerce, she convened the group to study this, and when they spent 5 years with the private sector, with the environmentalists, with the environmental regulators, to figure out how to repostulate and get this done.
Mm-hmm.
It was an enormous effort to get the regulations and the rules done in this session. And frankly, because it's such a complicated and heavy lift, I think my best contribution in it was to keep the working group together once you get over the finish line.
Well done.
And this is the biggest problem in legislation and in governance, is the work only begins when you assemble the ingredients for the recipe, and you've got to monitor the outcomes, because it was a very complex process. It took us 5 years to get to this release-based system, which is going to allow for much quicker transfers of property, much better defined resolution of pollution, and a clean bill of health for people to develop properties that were questionable when they were acquired. Mm-hmm. So it's going to create a big impetus for economic development. We think billions of dollars.
Great, and it could help with this housing problem that we have, our crisis. We just
Absolutely.
need to build more. So it's a great, wonderful, thank you, and that is making the sausage, right? That's what.
Right, and the next step is, and as I said, what I want to claim credit was I insisted on the extension of the group for I believe the next 5 years. So the entire working group will have a process now of reviewing the companies that pass through this system now. And as I like to say, it's to make sure that the dog actually hunts, that he doesn't wander off into the side field. Because now you've built this mousetrap, you want to make sure it's functional, and that people get in, they get out, everything's done. So we'll be monitoring the system over the next 2 years, particularly as companies enter into this release-based remediation. Make sure it's quick, make sure everybody's happy, make sure it accomplishes its goals.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left, but you were also, because you're on the Human Services Board committee, you were involved in the Child Care Act. We've talked to Cece Moore a bit about this on the show. So just if you have any additions to what she has said, which sounds like a wide-ranging, very thought-out bill, thrilled that this has happened. Any more comments from you?
Yeah, I'll claim at some level authorship of the bill. I sat with the child care advocates a couple of years ago, and government's a funny instrument, and so we would allocate our resources through the budgetary process, and we'd get to a certain point and we'd spend every dollar, and then there was a question about whether we could do something for early childhood education, and we'd say, well, the governor, it's not one of his major priorities, and which was a misrepresentation. It was that we had allocated every last dollar, and there was no additional money available. And I thought it was a rather insincere way. And I spoke to the advocates and I said, you need to establish a trust fund. You need to get this done. You need to advocate for this.
You came up with the endowment plan.
Right. So I brought it to the trust people, and luckily the governor sat there and brought it forward.
Well
so
done.
I don't necessarily claim credit with the governor. I would claim credit with the advocates who actually, at the point in time where I came up with it, it was in a private caucus meeting. Somebody leaked it. They came out and they made me champion of the year for childhood education.
Goodness.
So
No,
I was very
seriously,
proud.
I was wondering who came up with that idea because it's such a good one. If anybody's tuning in right now, I am sitting here at WGCH 71 Lewis Street in Greenwich with CT State Rep Steve Meskers of the 150. He represents Cobb and Old Greenwich right here, and we're talking about all the hard work that they have done, he and his colleagues in the state legislature. So we're just kind of revisiting the Child Care Act. But Steve, I'm so impressed because this is one of the problems with some just governance, right, is continuing to come up with money. But if you do it in a very smart way like this, which is creating endowment and then using the money that you make off of it, then it's sustainable.
Which is the most important thing. The problem with overpromising is that either you under-deliver or you over-indebt yourself. So this was, I think, a very sane fiscal structure to fund this. And if you think about early childhood education, you know, when we talk about income disparities in the United States, which is a problem for the lower income population, if you think about the fact that early childhood education runs in the neighborhood of $18,000 to $24,000 for a 52-week program, it becomes unaffordable if you're looking at it in after-tax dollars. So in many cases, what you end up with is that you have one of the parents staying home.
Yeah.
And now we've solved that issue.
All right. Well, we have to wrap it up. I'm going to say thank you so much to Steve Meskers for visiting with us today. This is Trevor Crow, Trevor and Friends. We'll be right back. You're listening to WGCH 1490 AM.